Hello, everyone. I'm Traci Arieli, end-of-life doula and founder of Comforting Closure. Today, we're exploring what makes us uniquely human, our ability to tell stories. Joining me is Karla Combres, a legacy guide and celebrant who helps individuals connect with and honor their unique narrative. Karla, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Traci, for inviting me.
Karla, can you start off by sharing how your journey led you to become a legacy guide and a celebrant?
Sure. Yeah, if we were really to start from the very beginning, I would say it was from when I was a small child. If you asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I said I wanted to be a part-time preacher, part-time teacher, not really understanding what that meant. And to this day, if I were to say that to someone, I think they might have an idea of what that means to them. But what I see what I'm doing really is not within any religious kind of framework, but really working with people about some of the existential questions, exploring their values, their beliefs. I do that in the work that I do. And I do a lot of teaching. So I do workshops and share some of the things I've learned along the way. I came to this work through end of life, the end of life field. So I was attending and then hosting death cafes, um, co-founded a local threshold choir to sing at the bedsides of the seriously ill and dying, volunteered with hospice. So there were a number of things that kind of were leading me in a certain direction. And it was really being with people who were dying and being with families who were bereaved, um, that I started to get more clear on the possibilities that we have, not only at the time of death, but all through our lives, of finding clarity on who matters, what matters, how to live with more intention and attention. And so that's the crux of my work as a legacy guide, is to really try to help people identify how do they want to be remembered and how are we living into that now. And if we're not, like, how can we adjust to ensure that we're living in a way that is aligned with our values and our beliefs. And you know whether we like it or not, how we're living is how we will be remembered. So we may as well bring some intention to that.
What is it about storytelling that makes it such a powerful tool for human connection and understanding?
We are storytelling creatures. I mean, we've been doing this since time immemorial, and um, it's through telling our stories and hearing each other's stories that we learn about living. We gain insights into our living. It informs how we want to shape our lives. Um, and it captures our imagination. Um, when we share through story, it captures our attention. It brings us in. Our it engages the senses. There's so much richness to a story rather than just delivering information that allows us to connect in a much more meaningful way, person to person, within a community. And so that's why it's such a powerful tool in my mind.
Yeah, I love how you mentioned before when you were talking about what you do, how you work with people on their legacy and on their story, and how it shows them how they're living their lives and if they need to make changes. So it's something that is not only for telling other people their the story, but um, telling ourselves or showing us what we need to do and how we're living our lives. Is that really common when, especially at the end of life, that people are using this tool to maybe tie up loose ends? Or
I think we sometimes forget the power of it. Um, a lot of my work has been in doing ceremonies with people. So working with a family and close loved ones of someone who's recently died or died years ago as well, memorializing them, but then also working with the dying. And when it comes to ceremony planning, people's minds automatically goes to sort of the format. What's it going to look like? What's the structure going to be? What's going to be included? What's not going to be included? And I always back it up. Um, and start with story. And I think sometimes that's confusing for people because it's very comforting to do something, to have clear to-do list, task list, to know what the venue is going to be, know what the music's going to be played, know where the donations are going to go, or whatever those details might be. But when we flip it and we start with story, it gets us out of our heads and moves us down into our hearts, first of all. And then those other decisions kind of tend to fall into place because then they're informed by the story. And that's where the essence of the person comes out. That's where the meaning making starts to happen, the connections deepen. And so it seems like the most obvious thing in the world when you just say it like that, but we are out of habit, I would say, or we are very left brain in our society of analytical, logical to do. And it's about kind of moving into that right hemisphere of the storytelling, the creativity, the intuition, the feeling, all of that is where that's sort of my preferred place. And that's where I try to help guide people into. And of course, at some point, there is a very left brain part that has to step in and to kind of try to bring some order to it all. But I find that the whole process is much more powerful when we start with story.
How does storytelling contribute to preserving a cultural heritage and family traditions?
Well, it gives context, for instance. This is so random. I don't know why it came to mind right now, but you've maybe heard the story of the grown daughters of someone who were putting a roast in the oven. Was it you who told me this recently? I can't remember. Putting a roast in the oven in the roaster, and they always cut the butt end off, and and that was just what they always did, and they weren't sure why they did it, but that's what their mom did. That's what their grandma did, so they did it that way. And their mom had long passed, so they asked their aging aunt or something like that, like, why is it that we cut the end off the roast? And they thought there was some kind of culinary reason for it, but actually it was just because back in the day the oven was smaller, or the wood stove, or wherever they happened to roast it, and that the pan, that was how it fit, and so you had to cut it off. So you know if you didn't have that context, it would be meaningless. This is maybe a silly example, but I think what it does is when you share stories, when you share your life stories and those turning points, the relationships that had an impact on you, good, bad, messy middle, as it often is, it gives context. It helps us to understand maybe our current conditions. It helps us to see a heritage of resilience, maybe, or of hard work that can kind of bolster us. And there's actually research that's been done to show that families that are connected with their history and know their family history are shown to be more resilient when faced with hardships or difficult situations. So there's, I mean, practical, studied, researched, proven benefits to it. But even without all of that data, I think around identity, and knowing kind of your place in the world and where you started from. I will say, though, that not all family histories or traditions are ones that we necessarily want to hang on to. Also, some people don't have the privilege of knowing their family history. Maybe it was stripped away. So I think part of it is choosing what you want to hang on to and what you want to let go of. So knowing it doesn't necessarily mean you have to continue it, but it's about choosing maybe a different way sometimes. I'm in the middle of a workshop series that I've just recently launched called Write Your Living Legacy. And I plan on continuing this, but this is the first cohort with 6 weeks of people. And every week they come and they share a story. And out of the 6 people participating, several of them talked about the the way maybe that they were raised, certain issues around the way that they were raised, the good and the bad, the ugly, the beautiful. and then about like making a choice to do it differently in their family and what they wanted to hang on to and what they wanted to let go of. So, and probably their kids are going to do the same thing, right? They're going to learn about their own family history, and at some point they're going to pave their own way. But knowing a bit where they came from and giving that context um, can really equip us for making choices for ourselves to do things in a different way.
That sense of heritage and storytelling, belonging and identity through storytelling is so powerful.
Mm.
Um, and I know you mentioned people that history was stripped away for various reasons, and I think that could really affect the person, and trying to find that again is important.
Definitely.
Can you describe the process of working with someone to craft their life story? How do you approach such a personal and significant task?
Mm. It, it really depends on the type of work that I'm doing. So if I just touch on this workshop series right now that I just mentioned, the people are writing those stories themselves. And what I'm there to do is to create a safe and brave container, to create a community where there's trust that the stories will be held in confidentiality, that there won't be judgment, brought into the stories. So creating the container and then sharing creative exercises, self-reflection exercises, and ways to like tap into those stories, and to, because a lot of people want to write their story and gosh, they don't even know where to begin. There's like, how do you even start? And again, like I was saying before, with ceremonies where people often think about the format, well, they think about their life story like, I got to start from when I was a baby and move through all the stages, right? And a very linear way of doing it. This process starts in a much different way, and it starts with story. It starts with around themes, and has a series of prompting questions to kind of help to trigger memories, help to stimulate, um, in your mind's eye, memories that maybe were long buried. And in exploring them and sort of tapping into the senses, and using writing techniques that help to elevate the stories, um, insights come out and then are shared with the community. So when you ask how I help people with storytelling, in that sense, it's really about creating the conditions, empowering people with tools, helping them to dive deep into their own memory troves, building the community. That's my role there. And then when I work one-on-one with people, whether it be with individuals or families or couples, um, to tell their love story, to tell the life story of someone, we do start with stories. Um, and my role there is to be a really good listener through all of it. I would say is to put my own thoughts aside, be a compassionate presence, ask good questions, listen for what's said and what's not said, and reflect back. So always reflecting back. When I'm writing, I can't make I can't make this stuff up, right? It has to come from them. So it's a real collaborative process to to uncover what's essential with people and for them, um, because what is meaningful for them won't necessarily be meaningful for me. So yeah, collaboration, community, deep listening, creativity, all of these are kind of essential pieces, I would say, to the work.
So you do a lot of writing. Are there other mediums that people are using to tell their story also? And do you work with that? How is that different?
Hmm, good question. Um, there are so many things happening, interesting things happening out in the world with people doing video capturing, audio recordings, legacy scrapbooks. Those are things that I haven't done with people. Well, no, I shouldn't say that entirely. When it comes to ceremonies, there are a lot of different media that we bring in. Um, but for the most part, it's in the writing and the sharing that I work with people. whether that be as they pull their own stories together, or as we craft their story into a ceremony, or helping people to brainstorm different ways to bring in, to be inspired by, say, mementos that are meaningful, photos that are meaningful. And then in terms of doing something with them, there are all kinds of things people can do to document and share those in a creative and meaningful way for the loved ones in their communities.
I want to talk a little bit about social media because it's so prevalent, and I'm sure you and I, for the good or bad, we were on social media. I'm on social media a lot, and how has I see people telling their stories or creating their stories online and on social media. How do you see, or how has that changed the role of storytelling in general? I mean, you might not be working with someone who's doing that via social media, but just looking at it through your lens, your perspective, is there anything that stands out to you? And do you see, or how does that change the story or a person's narrative?
What we see online and even in conversations is usually not the whole story. Um, it's Social media is a powerful tool for connecting, for finding like-minded people in far-flung places in the world. It can be very beautiful that way, and it can also be so toxic. I'm not saying anything new here, but people are usually posting the highlight reels of their lives, and so it can actually further alienate us from each other and increase loneliness. Yeah, so there's a risk there that we start to think that that's real life, and when it isn't. That said, it's also a powerful way. I mean, we're seeing it with some of the crap that's happening in the world, um, that people whose stories otherwise wouldn't be heard is actually reaching us. So I think it's a tool like many, that there's good things about it, bad things about it, and we need to be skillful in the way that we use it. And as far as storytelling, yeah, I love that it's made storytelling accessible for more people and given a platform to more people. But a lot of what I see on there too, I try to take with a grain of salt.
In your own practice, how do you integrate a person's unique stories and values when creating ceremonies in, let's say, a wedding or a funeral or any other type of ceremony?
Hmm. Well, I again, like I said before, I listen deeply, um, and then try to find ways to reflect those things that are meaningful for the. So I'll use the example of a memorial ceremony. Um, at the time of a death, at a wedding ceremony, people are usually wrapped up in kind of a bubble of like a endorphin high, whereas I feel like the stakes are very high in a memorial ceremony. People are very raw and vulnerable, and anything that smacks of inauthenticity hurts all the more, right? If you're not um, truly reflecting their person, it can really fall flat and it can actually be damaging. Um, and so, if a person was atheist and we bring religious sacraments or prayer into it, it's inauthentic. And same thing goes the other way around. Or, if a person that we're honoring was a domineering, overbearing, estranged parent, and we go on and wax philosophic about what a great parent they were, it's further damaging. So it's like finding this middle way where we can lift up, um, the way a person was in the world that is authentic, um, that recognizes them as fully human, and in that way I mean, you know, like the good and the bad, and what then sort of how that can inform our living. It's also very much, it's not just about honoring the person who's died. It's about how are we, the living, going to now move on in a world without their physical presence, and how do we want our relationship with them to inform our living. So um, a person's values and beliefs are essential to painting the full picture of how a person lived and how they'll be remembered and how their legacy will be carried on.
For the people who are still alive and who are grieving, how does sharing and preserving that life story impact that grieving process? Do you see a difference and how that might help?
Absolutely. I think at any ceremony, at any end of life ceremony, people, all the people, no matter how close they were to the person who's died, should come away feeling like they know them a little bit better. It allows like I said before, when the story is not just telling the chronological linear telling of their life, but bringing in anecdotes that are rich with the sensual, the imagination and the senses. It evokes the essence of the person in such a way that you can almost feel their physical their presence there. I shouldn't say physical, but feel their presence, feel them there, and it can really inspire people to know that they can continue to carry their person with them. Of course, it's not the end all and be all, and it's not uh, the end of a grieving journey, but it can be a very healthy step toward healing. I'm curious, am I allowed to ask you questions,
Please,
Tracy?
please, yes, yes.
Yeah.
This should be
Are,
conversation. So
yeah.
yes, please.
Again, your work as a doula, I'm assuming you work mostly with the dying, or are you working closely with their families too? I'm just curious to
Yes.
know how story comes into your work as well.
Yeah, I work with the families and the dying, so both of them. I do a lot of grief work also, and that storytelling. I notice that when I'm doing legacy work with people, that is so important. And there's writing sometimes. There's sometimes just pictures that people will put together in a story. Video is really popular, um, and for the family after the person passes away to have that um, is really powerful.
Mm.
And during the process, during of the legacy work, it's really powerful for the person who's dying. Also, it brings them such a sense of happiness, because when a person is passing away, I notice that um, they're surrounded by a whole host of people. They have the hospice workers, they have their family members who are very, can be very overwhelmed.
Hmm.
And most of the time they're lying in bed. I'm working with people who are a lot of times at their end stage, and yeah, I see such a difference when I start asking them questions and they start talking about their lives, and they want to talk about their lives. They want to remember. They want to do that review.
Hmm.
So it's really, really powerful. And in areas when there's some sadness attached or some regret attached, it gives them the opportunity to do something about it. So in that sense, the storytelling when the person is alive is really powerful, but after the post death, their family having this and is really important. On a personal, I'll give a personal example of my own life.
Hmm.
Um, when my husband and I got married, we had my parents and his parents and my grandmother, who was the only remaining grandparent, um, tell their love story. How did they meet? And it was so wonderful. It was really cool. And you could see each set of parents, when they'd be telling their love story, their faces would light up and they would be smiling, and it would be really wonderful. Then when my grandfather wasn't alive, when my grandmother told her love story, it was, we heard stories we never heard before. So it was great. And when she
That's
passed away, every single person on my side was like, can we get a copy of that? Can we get a
hmm
copy of that? And so those stories, and my brothers have children. Some of them met my grandmother. They might not remember her because they were very young, but by having these stories, they get a really good sense of who she was. So having those stories has been really powerful, and people telling their stories is powerful for them. And through the grieving process, having people who are grieving write down their stories, journal their stories, is very profound and impactful. As I know you mentioned that there has been studies, there have been studies that show, hey, if you journal for only 20 minutes a day, it really helps your mind sort through that grieving, and it helps. So, yeah, that's how I usually use storytelling.
Beautiful. That reminds me, my husband actually the year we that's a beautiful anecdote, by the way, about your wedding. I think I've never heard of that idea. It's a beautiful one. The year we got married, which is 20 years ago this year, um, about 6 months before we got married, my husband flew back to our home province of Saskatchewan, where we now live, but we were in Ontario at the time. And he interviewed both of his grandmothers for like on video for, I don't know, 5 or 6 hours each. And he just wanted to learn about them, about their lives, about their parents. And and then those tapes have been kind of sitting, and he eventually got them digitized and put onto to CDs and then a USB. But it's kind of like, woof, overwhelming. Then what do you do with all of that information, you know? But when his first grandma died, maybe 8 years ago or so, he did an edited version of it and showed it the night before her funeral when all the family was gathered. And same thing, you know, everybody, can we get a copy? Can we get a copy? Because to see her face again, to hear the stories, to laugh together about things that she was sharing, um, was so powerful. And then this past summer, his other grandma, who's still living, she's 100 years old, and got together to celebrate her 100th. And he edited a version down to that too. And her memory is slipping now, so you know we couldn't have captured those stories anymore. So they are like just like gold. And there's not only family history, but that time that has gone by to revisit things from the past, and to see them in today's light can be very redemptive too. In that family, she was the she married my father-in-law's dad, so I guess my husband's grandpa, after he'd been a widower for 5 years or something, and she had been a widow as well. So they remarried each other, and so she's the only grandma my husband has ever known, but she's the second mom my father-in-law has ever known. And so she told the story about joining this family and kind of how she eventually became like a mother to them, and how you know, she was the one to go wedding dress shopping with one of the daughters, where there's this, you know, tension between the loss of her birth mom and then this person coming in, and to bring all that to this new generation of people and to give real true context to the pain that people had gone through, the how things in life are never really cut and dry and super clear, but we can navigate these things, and it helps, I think, to strengthen all of us as we go through some of the same things in our own lives. So, yeah, thanks for reminding me of that. It was, and now actually, my son, who's 11, has to do a story, or not a story, but a research project for his social sciences class. And he was supposed to interview a newcomer to Canada about their experience, but he really wanted to learn about his ancestors. So we went back to those videos and he watched them and he listened to all the questions that my husband had asked of his grandmother about her parents and when they came from Belgium. And, her father had been a prisoner of war in a German war camp, and, about their time moving over here to the prairie and settling and all of that. And now here's my son at the table taking notes and doing something new with that, and then spreading that impact again. Like, it's all quite heartwarming and, um, again, just a real reminder of the power of story.
Yeah, that sense of, again, the sense of belonging, that sense of your identity, because I know who I am as Traci, but to have that sense of where your family came from and your ancestry and yeah, where you came from is important,
Yeah.
at least to many people. Maybe not to everyone, but it's really grounding.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
What, again, go back to your practice now. What has do you have any like stories that stand out? Any impactful or memorable moments in your career that just where a story changed a person or really helped?
Usually, the really good stuff comes when we're able to just stretch a little bit and bring more of ourselves to something. So, you know, in the writing that people are doing in these classes that I'm doing right now, of course they share what they want to share, what they're comfortable sharing. They don't need to share more than they are, but they're also just writing for themselves at this point. Um, and say you want to tell this redemptive story about having overcome addiction, for an example. You can tell that story, but unless you do it by also examining maybe some of the hurt that may have come at your hands during the time of addiction, or uh, some of the regrets that you might have, it's not really the whole story yet. And when I think about in a wedding ceremony, for instance, people want it to be joyful, and they may have real pain. Maybe I did a wedding ceremony for someone whose mother I had done the memorial for just the year before. And so that is like the elephant in the room, right? Her mom's not there on her wedding day, and she had a lot of emotion about it. And I will never push anybody to do anything they're not comfortable with. But I will say that unless we acknowledge it somehow, can be very subtle, or it can be like a ritual unto itself to honor the person. It's it's going to be there anyway, and it's going to be like pushing down and taking energy from the day. And when we can open ourselves to it and allow it to flow, that's where the connections happen and the meaning making happens. I was actually just on the phone this week with family I worked with 2 years ago to honor their son in a memorial ceremony. And he left behind two teenage kids. And so I was talking with the parents, so the grandparents of these two teenage kids, and they were really delighting in the Christmas that they just had together. And it was the first time they'd all come to the family home where he had died since he died, or not since he died, but for a Christmas, for a, one of these really key family gatherings that can be hard um, to navigate without your person there. And the mom, who is kind of a soft spoken person, um, she said, I had this reading that I found about grief in the holidays, and I really wanted to share it. But she was nervous to share it because it brings emotion to it, right? But it felt really important to her to make space for what they were feeling. And so they started their first meal together, and she shared this reading, and she named him, and she named somebody else in their family who's since died. And they said, and then after that, the whole day just opened up. And, they had this beautiful time of connection, and they played games, and they went skating on the frozen lake. And, um, but I find time and again, that when we can push past that discomfort, and it opens the door and allows others to do the same. And that's really the power of storytelling, I think, and of opening ourselves to the whole truth, like this wholehearted truth, which includes the brokenness. It's such a way to connect more deeply with each other and more truthfully.
We live in, especially here in the U.S., we live in communities now, or where there's some violence that's happening, gun violence, and you see these communities coming together after something horrific like that happens. Um, do you find that storytelling in that setting? I mean, have you found that there's within a community that there's anything being done like storytelling to help people move through that and to redefine their story as a community?
A huge example in Canada, and this is you know, I see that as my calling in the world, is to create spaces for that. Um, but on a much larger scale in Canada, we have had the past several years the Truth and Reconciliation movement, and there was a panel of people who went across the country to gather the stories of residential school survivors, Indigenous children who were taken from their families and put into residential schools as a what's the word, institutionalized policy that was to, the goal was to take the Indian out of the child, basically. Um, and I think it's like a real reckoning, but for Canadians, who a lot of people, myself included, grew up ignorant to what had happened. And when you hear the stories of the people, there is no, you can't turn away from that. It's somebody's truth and somebody's lived experience. And it's uncomfortable, but it allows to finally for us to get to know each other, human to human. And there is no reconciliation, there is no repair that can happen until we know and trust each other and begin to understand each other. And that all starts with story. So that's, when you asked that question, that's the first thing that came to my mind, is the TRC stuff, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission work, that has been, and it's an ongoing thing, it's generation. And it's, all of these examples I'm telling you about today, there are no quick wins, really. It's about relationship building and kind of stepping off this urge to get her done, get her done, get her done, and to slow down the process and get to know each other and build trust so that we can open ourselves and be more honest. And this is why you and I both, being in the end of life sphere, see this, is that when we can stop doing things by the clock and start doing things more by the heart, that's where real change and shifts can happen. And that can happen right at the end of life too. You talked about the legacy work that you're doing with people. Hopefully people will start to do some of that much earlier in their lives. And that's what I'm trying to do with the work that I'm doing. But it's never too late, until it's too late. But, even at the end of life, you can have, you've heard about the five, I don't know if it's Ira Bjork who said this, or I think it is his, but the five things that you need to say at the end of life is, I forgive you, please forgive me, I love you, thank you, and goodbye. And when it comes down to it, that's all that needs to be said and felt from a heartfelt place. But starting that earlier and making space for some of that true and meaningful connection through getting to know each other, telling our stories, that's where the real change can happen, in my opinion.
Yeah. What advice would you give to someone looking to explore their own legacy and life story? Like, how would they begin? And this is with someone that doesn't have the advantage of having you or anyone to guide them, what would you say to them? Where should they start?
Mm. I think your point before about 20 minutes a day journaling and keeping a little file on your phone, a notes file or a notebook handy, because you never know when inspiration will strike or when a memory will pop into your mind. Um, it becomes overwhelming when you say, okay, I'm going to sit down and write my book, or I'm going to sit down and write my stories, and you plunk yourself down and expect it to just flow. It probably won't. So opening yourself and attuning yourself to the things that light you up, the things that you want to be sure to share with others, and making it a practice um, will help for sure. Getting help from someone like you, from someone like me, is always an option. Reading others' memoirs, consume, uh, listen to the way other people have done it. There are all kinds of really good books out there to help people along, but I would say when you read the life story of someone else and you're moved by anecdotes that they share, you start to see that you don't have to have a remarkable quote unquote life to make it worthy of sharing. And I think a big part of what gets in people's way is they they doubt themselves, and we have this inner critic that says, well, my story's not that important, or um, does anybody really want to hear what I have to say? And actually the example I used in my class yesterday was of my own grandmother, who raised a family of 8 kids on the farm, no running water, no electricity. She probably never would have thought that it would be something that anyone would be interested in ever reading. But man, I would love to know what she thought and what she felt about cooking for all those people, all those kids, and the hardships, the isolation. She struggled with mental illness. She lost a daughter, at the age of 5. She lived through so much. And I feel like I could learn so much from her if I only knew her story in a more, in a more nuanced way from her.
Finally, what message would you like to leave with our listeners about the importance of writing your story, documenting that, and celebrating your life?
Hmm. Well, I see the storytelling and documenting as having value in so many different ways. There is the way, of course, the big piece of legacy where you're leaving something behind. And when I think legacy, I'm not thinking about, the wealth that we're leaving behind or the physical properties that we're leaving behind in our inheritance. I'm thinking about how we'll be remembered. So sharing our stories and having this tangible touchstone for our families is of huge value. But whether or not you package that up neatly and share it with your family and it gets passed down, whether or not that ever happens, the reflecting on and capturing and sharing your story um, can really inform our living. So I don't see it as this piece that's going to just be left behind. I see it as part of our living legacy and how informing how we're going to live. Our stories are always unfolding, and bringing curiosity to the experiences that we've had um, opens us to to hope and to new possibilities in what might still lie ahead. So yeah, I would just say that don't don't overthink it, um, but know that there's value in it in so many ways.
Well, Karla, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate it. How can people get a hold of you and find out more about your workshops and all the good things that you're doing?
Thank you, Tracy. People can find me at my website, which if you go in the show notes, you'll see how my name is spelled, Karla with a K, Combres.com. I'm also on Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook, and I would love for people to follow me there. You can join my mailing list where I share musings, my legacy letters around living fully and with intention so we can die fully, and how to to live a life with more intention and attention. I've got a series of workshops coming up again, a new series of the Write Your Living Legacy. People can work with me one-on-one as well as a legacy guide or ceremony guide, or holding space consultant. So thank you so, so much for having me on. And I love the work that you're putting out into the world. I think this is an amazing platform, and I just feel really privileged to have been on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Folks, the stories we carry and share are not just reflections of who we are, but a way for future generations of our family to connect with us. Our stories bridge the gaps between the past, present, and future, and they offer a unique lens through which our descendants can understand and relate to us. If Karla's words have inspired you, I encourage you to connect with her and to explore your own life story in a way that brings meaning and connection. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please comment below or reach out to me directly. And if you found this conversation to be helpful, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. This is Traci Arieli from Comforting Closure, wishing you peace and comfort in your journey. Until next time, take care.